Hi, everybody. Welcome to our August Recess Advocacy webinar. Thank you guys all so much for joining us. Congressional recess is a scheduled period when members of the House and Senate return to their home states and districts instead of staying in Washington, D.C. These breaks are built into the legislative calendar and happen several times a year, including the longest one in August, which is why we're having this event today. So while they may not be voting on legislation during recess, members of Congress are still working. They're just closer to home. They use this time to meet with constituents, attend local events, visit schools and businesses, and hear directly from the folks that they represent, which is why this is such an important time for advocacy. With lawmakers being back in their community, this is the perfect opportunity to schedule meetings, invite them to visit a program, or attend a town hall to raise important issues like childcare. So you're going to hear from our panel of experts today about how to really maximize this time. You're going to hear from Ann Hedgepeth with Childcare Aware of America, Daniel Haynes with NACey, Joseph O'Hearn with First 5 Years Fund, and Brandon Reese with the National Collection of for Infants and Toddlers. So a couple quick notes before we begin. We will be sharing all the materials that we talk about, all the links, etc., with you via email afterwards. And we're also going to upload them on our website. And then we're also going to have a time after we hear from all of our panelists for questions. And so to start out, I am going to kick it over to Ann, who's going to just talk us through a state of play.
Thanks, Jane. I'm so thrilled to be here with everyone today. I'm Ann Hedgepeth. I head up policy and research at Childcare Aware of America, and I will go ahead and get us moving through our slide deck and talk a little bit about what's going on in DC, why we're here today, and what you need to know to go into conversations with your members of Congress and talk about childcare and early learning. So on the next slide, I'm going to start with a really high level state of play or level set for us all, which is to start by saying that when we talk about taking advantage of recess, this time when our members of Congress come home to the district or the state and are eager to meet with their constituents, we are really holding two goals in mind when we do this work. And the first is that over the long term, we all know that it makes a difference to build relationships with and to strengthen relationships with members of Congress and their staff. Whether you agree on everything or not, you are the experts on childcare and early learning in your community from a variety of perspectives, those of parents, of childcare providers, teachers, and educators, of folks who benefit from childcare in the community, and from those who are part of the system as a whole. And having a relationship with your member of Congress, being their go-to resource on childcare and early learning, can pay dividends over time. But we are also in a moment right this minute, and I'll dig in a little bit more about what it means, where we have to fight for annual funding for our childcare and early learning programs, making August recess a prime moment to have conversations with members of Congress or their staff about childcare, about its importance to you, how it works, and why it needs to be protected and invested in to support children, families in our communities. So moving on to the next slide, I want to talk about sorry, I got us going too far, Jane. Thank you for going back one. I would talk about sort of what's been going on. And when we talk about fighting for childcare funding during recess this August, what are we really specifically digging in on? It's been such a busy spring in Washington, D.C. And so many of you all who've been engaging in advocacy have been talking to members of Congress about different policies that impact the childcare and early learning system, either by impacting our providers and our teachers, our families and our children, and even things that could be improvements generally for some families who are spending money on childcare. But one thing I wanted to underscore is that while we've been working all spring around a big piece of legislation that has become law, the One Big Beautiful Bill, where there have been some policies, some good policies, some harmful policies, ultimately, we did not solve childcare in that One Big Beautiful Bill. And we didn't tackle annual funding for childcare and early learning programs in that bill that has now become law, which means it is time for us to talk to Congress about that annual funding that they do every single year to support a variety of childcare and early learning programs. And while all of this is happening in the context of actions on the part of the administration that may be impacting childcare programs, that may be impacting the rules and regulations of our childcare system, and while we are watching those things and trying to understand what they mean for our childcare system, we still have to, amidst all of this noise, talk to our members of Congress about the importance of putting federal investments into childcare and early learning, and particularly protecting our childcare and early learning funding streams from elimination or cuts. And so, having worked on a lot of things this spring, talked about the importance of childcare with your members of Congress, dug in on tax policy and Medicaid policy, and managed a whole host of decisions coming out of the administration. Right now, going into August, we want to talk about the critical importance of federal investment in childcare and why the appropriations process and the moment we're in right now is the moment we need Congress to act on that funding for childcare and early learning. So moving to the next slide, I'll tell you about a couple of talking points or high-level messages that we think are important to keep in mind. And I have a feeling that several folks will reiterate these as we move through the webinar. So the first is I want to acknowledge that I think we know that everywhere across the country, it's hard for childcare, for families to find and afford the quality childcare they need. Many of you have state and local data that you can draw from. And if you don't, you can take a look at some of the resources available from the organizations on the call. Childcare Aware of America has annual price and supply data that may be helpful. We'll share some links a little later on that you can dig in on. But we know that no matter where you are, there are challenges facing families. And we know also that robust federal funding for early learning and for childcare can make a difference. Congress is in the middle of making decisions about annual funding through the appropriations process. And they're going to be at home in August to connect with constituents. And so we want to take a message to them now that says protect and prioritize funding for childcare and early learning programs. So let's talk a little bit about where we are in this appropriations process. And this is a process that is, you would think, would be predictable. We do it every year, and yet every year has its quirks and differences. And the first thing I'll note is that Congress is always aiming for the September 30th deadline. That's when the current fiscal year wraps up, and they have to kick off and have funding in place for the next fiscal year. But it has been a long time since Congress has been able to get all of their funding bills done by September 30th. They are almost always still making decisions, either on all of the funding provisions they need to put in place, or at least on some of them by that September 30th deadline. And so it is not unusual that by September 30th, Congress will pass a continuing resolution. They will temporarily extend funding for some set of time, sometimes until December. We've even seen it go into the spring of the next year before, and they will continue to debate and settle on funding levels. It is possible for Congress to decide to fund things at current levels for another year. And that's actually what happened this past year. That's how fiscal year 25, the year we're in right now, is operating. It's under a long-term continuing resolution with this flat funding amount. But we aren't quite there yet, which means we have this opportunity before we get to those continuing resolutions to say to Congress that it's really important, first of all, to protect and not to cut childcare and early learning programs. And to the extent that there's the opportunity to make additional investments, we would encourage Congress to prioritize childcare and early learning. So we're right at the early part of this process. We're ahead of that first September 30th deadline, which makes it a critical moment to say something to Congress about funding and the need for support for childcare and early learning. And we have a number of childcare and early learning programs that utilize federal funding that we can talk about when we're having conversations with Congress. All of you are aware of the Child Care and Development Block Grant, the funding that goes to states that they use for subsidies, vouchers, or payments to parents to afford childcare, and that they also use to invest in quality and infrastructure within the childcare system. We have Head Start programs across the country that are federally funded. Those are early learning and wraparound services for children and families in poverty. And Head Start programs receive federal funding every year. We have the preschool development grants, Birth Through 5, which are grants that go to state systems to help bring together funding streams, make them more efficient and effective, improve data systems, and invest in the childcare and early learning system as a whole. Funding flows from the federal government to support early intervention, special education, and services for children with disabilities through IDEA Parts B and C. And we even support parenting students in institutions of higher education through programs like C Campus. There are a few others out there, and all of these programs are unique and serve specific populations. They come together to create our childcare and early learning system as a whole, and they all have some federal funding that is really critical to their operation, their ability to continue to serve families, existing families receiving support, and even expand services. And it's critical that we make the case for all of them when we're talking to members of Congress. I want to note that while everyone on the phone here, I think, believes in childcare and early learning, we know how important it is. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't want to fight for it. But I also want to reassure you that there is support behind you from the public. We are making the case for something that people agree we need additional public support for. Many of the groups on the phone today have done polling before, and I know that we'll have some resources for you at the end, but I wanted to mention specifically some of Child Care Way of America's recent polling, which talked to parents as a group, and they absolutely agree that we need to increase funding for childcare and early learning. And what we found really interesting was that parents in small towns and parents in rural communities felt even more strongly than parents overall that investments in childcare needed to happen. And an overwhelming majority of parents not only wanted to see increased investments, they wanted their policymakers to act. And so I hope that when you have conversations with your member of Congress, you will keep in mind that parents are behind you in making these asks, as is the general public. And we've seen that in poll after poll after poll. We also know that members of Congress agree that we need to make investments in childcare. Just like advocates write letters and sometimes join letters together in coalition to Congress, members of Congress sign on to their own letters to each other, making the case for funding and policies. And this year, we had 285 members of Congress sign on to these letters, which are called Dear Colleague letters, and urge increased funding for federal early learning programs. These were members of Congress across the aisle, 238 Democrats and 47 Republicans. And using the QR code on the slide, or when Jane sends it around later, you'll be able to get to the links for these letters. You can see whether your members of Congress joined and use that in the conversations you have during recess. But the big picture is your members of Congress are going to be home for the month of August. It's a great time to talk to them about funding for childcare. We're at the right moment in the funding process for you to make the case. And you have widespread support behind you from the public, parents, and other members of Congress to make the case for childcare. So we hope you'll join us in scheduling meetings, taking action, and making time to meet with your members of Congress during recess. And with that, I think I am passing things over to Daniel, right?
Yep. Thank you, Anne. Really appreciate that great overview of where we are in the process right now and what people should be paying attention to in terms of the policies and programs that really impact families, young children, and early childhood educators. I get to spend a little bit more time talking about the why your voices matter so much in this moment, and why it is so important for us during the August recess to be directly engaging with members of Congress. Jane, can you go to the next slide? Advocates' voices are incredibly powerful, especially when members of Congress are back home. And I want to just share a little bit of context about how advocacy voices can influence the federal policy debate. In connecting with members of Congress and staff in my day job, I often talk to staff who don't know a lot about childcare and early learning. They don't know a lot about how the funding streams work. They don't know a lot about the cost. They don't know a lot about why parents have such a hard time finding affordable childcare and why early childhood educators make so little. Many members of Congress are, past the age where they have young children themselves. Many of them, their staff are before the age where they're going to have young children themselves. And so you really are, as Ann mentioned, the experts that they are going to be looking to understand these systems and to understand how the policies that they are voting on impact families and impact early childhood educators back home in their districts. And that's important to them because they want to be serving your needs. That is why they are in Congress. That is their entire job, is to represent the needs of their constituents. During the August recess, when they are intentionally meeting with folks back home, when they're intentionally connecting with folks in their communities, this is the best time for them to build those relationships. And it really does make a difference. I remember talking a couple years ago to a staffer in a West Virginia senator's office who really got the issue in a way that congressional staffers often don't. And in talking to her, I realized the reason that she did understand early childhood policy so well, and the reason that her boss was making such a commitment to supporting early childhood education in the appropriations process was because she had connected with early childhood educators in her community, in her state in West Virginia back home, who had talked about their business model, who had talked about the challenges retaining and supporting a highly qualified workforce, who had talked about the challenges reaching the families that needed care the most with the high costs that it takes to operate a program. They really understood and they really walked through what operating an early childhood education program looks like, and that staffer got it. And now that Senator, Shelley Moore Capito, is the chair of the Senate Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee, the subcommittee that plays the biggest role in the Senate in determining what funding levels will be for CCDBG, for Head Start, for IDEA, for all these critical programs that Ann mentioned. And so you can really make a difference when you build those relationships, when you build those connections. You never know when they're going to bear fruit, but they can make a huge impact on the members who are representing you, representing your community in Congress. And it can pay dividends, which is why in the most recent years, even though we've had some pretty challenging budget fights, there's been a lot of debate between the House and Senate. There's been a lot of debate between Republicans and Democrats about what to support. We've regularly seen childcare fare better than the vast majority of programs because you all back home and early childhood educators in every community across the country have done the hard work of building those relationships. And we have to continue that. And that relationship piece is so critical because they need to know who they can turn to learn more about these issues. Can you the next slide, Jane? So when you're connecting with a staffer or a member of Congress back home, you want to think a little about what they are hoping to get out of that meeting. For some, it's going to be the media attention and the ability to show that they're a child care champion. So if they're visiting a child care program, if they're talking to families, that benefits them as much as it benefits you because it gives them an opportunity to be seen as supporting our issues. And as Ann's polling shows, they understand that that's a political win for them. They want to be seen supporting these issues. But they're also going to have some more specific questions, especially as they're going into the appropriations process, especially when they're going into debates and trying to determine what they're going to prioritize, what they are going to deprioritize, and what they're really going to go to the mat for in terms of funding. They want to know how these issues are going to impact their state. They want to know whether people in their state actually care about it. If the voters aren't responsive and receptive to the issue, it's not going to be as big of a deal for them as something that voters really are responsive and receptive to. They also want to know what exactly you want from them. Again, as I mentioned, not all of these staffers are policy experts in the same way that many of my colleagues in the call are and many of you on the phone are. They do need to know kind of specifically what you want them to do and what action you want them to take. And as I mentioned before, they also want to know whether that relationship is one that is going to continue to support them in their work as they try and inform their boss or as they try and inform their own policies on an issue. So I'm going to walk a little bit through what the ask is right now. And this builds on some of what Ann shared, but if they're asking for advice on what they can do right now as they're debating the appropriations process, it's really simple. You're asking them to protect and prioritize funding for childcare and early learning in fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills. Specifically, you're asking them to prioritize funding for CCDBG, for Head Start, for preschool development's birth to 5, for IDEA Part C and IDEA Part B 619, respectively. Those are the portions of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that provide services for early intervention and preschool special education. And then the Child Care Access Means Parents in Schools program. And again, over the years, we've seen strong bipartisan support for all of these programs. These are not highly polarized asks. But in this current climate, it's more important than ever for folks to hear that that support is broad, is widespread in their communities, and that you want them to support all of these programs as they are going to make critical decisions about funding, because these are the programs that are going to matter most for young children and families and for early childhood educators in terms of helping them continue to serve their communities well. You can go to the next slide, Jane. I'm just going to talk a little bit more detail about one strategy that is particularly helpful, especially if you are an early childhood educator or program director. One of the most impactful activities you can do in August during recess is to invite members of Congress to see your program in action. As you're trying to create and build these relationships, help them see what high quality early childhood education looks like in action, because often there are misconceptions about the incredible value of the work that early childhood educators do, the incredible challenges that families face in accessing high quality early childhood education, and the availability of these great programs across the country. But when members of Congress are able to come see your programs, see how your educators, see how your colleagues are working to support young children's learning, it can really create virtuous cycles of support and help build out that need for more investment. So we want as many members of Congress as possible, regardless of whether you think they're someone who is predisposed to be a child care champion or not, to come and see high quality early childhood education in action, because that is where members really do change their perception. I know we sometimes talk about Congress as this, vast institution, but at the end of the day, every member of Congress is a person. They're a grandfather, grandmother, a parent. They understand and want to understand what their constituents' lives are like, and you can provide them an opportunity to do so. And as I mentioned earlier, the media coverage doesn't hurt them either, and it does give you an opportunity to get a foot in the door, really build that relationship in a deep way, and grow your impact and how you can help them understand the need for more funding for these programs. And as we'll share a little bit later in this webinar, NAEYC has a resource that we've created this year that will support you with step-by-step and how you invite a member of Congress to your program to take action. So I also mentioned there are a ton of resources available on state policy and state data. Every member of Congress wants to know, like we said, how this impacts their state, how this impacts their district. And many of our organizations have put out state surveys, state fact sheets, Head Start maps, supply and cost studies. I encourage you to just hang on this slide for a second and download all of these or scan all these links on your phone so you have access to these easy to use resources that can be so invaluable in shaping your own advocacy. And with that, I think I'm sharing it with Brandon now to talk about more of the how to get involved in meeting with congressional staff during recess.
Thank you, Daniel. And hi, everybody. My name is Brandon Reese. I am the co-chair for the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers Federal Huddle Peer Group, which is a mouthful, but glad to be here. So you've heard what's going on in Washington. You've heard the strategy and you heard the ask. So now let's apply that knowledge and prepare you for effective conversations with your members of Congress or their staff for this August recess. So we're going to keep this simple and practical, which is exactly how your meeting should feel. Next slide, please. All right, so first things first, we got to find your office. And that's all public information. If you don't know your member of Congress, you can easily do so by going to house.gov or senate.gov or congress.gov, although that's not as intuitive in my opinion, but or you could even Google it. I practiced that this morning to see what popped up, and I was able to figure out my member that way by clicking one of the first two links. So once you got your member's website down, go find the contact tab or the offices tab. Sometimes at the bottom of the website might take you a second to orient yourself, but find where their offices are located, and then figure out which district office is nearest to you. Many members have more than one. These district offices are going to be the best bet during recess because they're local, they're accessible, and they're, as someone who's used to work at a district office, they're often eager to hear from constituents. Then you need to call the office and ask for a meeting or if there are any upcoming town halls, and we'll go over that on the next slide. All right, so here's a sample script that you could use when you're calling. I'll just flag now that the yellow parts are the ones you're really going to want to customize to match your state and your story. But in general, you want to hit these main beats when you're calling. You want to mention who you are, the city where you live, and then make the ask for the meeting to discuss federal funding for childcare and early learning. Then you want to briefly provide a few points that show why this matters to you and your community. And then this is perhaps the most important thing, and you've heard it earlier from Daniel, you want to make the ask right there, and you're going to make that ask several times, but you want to talk about protecting and prioritizing funding for childcare and early learning in the FY26 appropriations package. And then you just want to keep this conversational. You don't want to impress them with stats on this phone call. You just want to schedule that meeting and connect the dots between your lived experience and their job to set the stage for a powerful meeting moving forward. Next slide. So now you got your meeting scheduled. Congrats. But I just want to flag, be prepared for anything. Sometimes you'll get 10 minutes, sometimes 30. It might be with the staffer instead of the member. So be prepared for anything. But you just want to keep this meeting short. You don't need a PowerPoint for a district office meeting. What matters is your local story. You want to make this local. You want to make this personal. You're the expert on your community or your childcare center. So your voice will carry the most weight here. And as Daniel mentioned earlier, don't forget it, if you are able to do so, provide an invitation to visit a program in person. That's the golden opportunity to turn abstract policy into something real and something that could demonstrate the real weight behind these numbers that people keep hearing about in Washington. And then, of course, to beat the drum again, you want to make that ask about protecting and prioritizing funding for childcare and early learning in the FY26 spending package. And another thing you want to do, and this is kind of a good pivot to my next slide, is you want to ask for that member's card. So you could send them a thank you email right after, because that thank you email, and we'll have a sample on the next slide, will help reinforce your ask and help build the relationship with that member. You next want to ask the staffer or the member to take a picture when you're at the office and then post that on social media, tag the member, and then in the caption, reinforce that ask again. And to just beat the drum one more time, you want to protect and prioritize funding for childcare and early learning at FY26 appropriations. And lastly, tell us how it went. Your intel helps groups like ours know what messages are resonating and what follow-up might be needed with these offices. Next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, here's a sample for a thank you email you can use. It doesn't have to be super fancy, but you just want to hit a few main parts. You want to thank them, mention when you met, provide a little recap of the meeting, a little refresher, and then remind them why this issue matters and why it matters to you specifically. Maybe bring a part of your story back just to, again, refresh their memory. And then, of course, reiterate the ask on supporting childcare and early learning in FY26 appropriations. And then again, if you can, include an offer to visit your program in person if that's something you're able to do. And then, of course, close out with another thank you. And speaking of closing with thank yous, thank you. And I will pass it to Joe to talk more about tactics.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. My name is Joe Hearn. I'm with First 5 Years Fund. Appreciate everyone getting on today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the other tactics you can use during August recess. As Anne and Daniel and Brandon all mentioned, it's incredibly important that they hear from you during this time. They hear from Daniel and Anne all the time on the Hill. They are far more interested in what their constituents back home have to say. And they're very interested in filling that August recess calendar. And so is their staff. They've got 3+ weeks of time to fill. So they're going to be busy looking for things to do. And we want to make sure they are feeling the love and attention and importance of early learning and childcare. So if you want to go to the next slide. We've got 3 tactics here that we want to amplify with folks as they all help with that relationship building, that elevating the issues by making it real for them and help amplify those voices. So first one that we have up here is the site visit. As Daniel mentioned, these are incredibly powerful. Making that ask to have, if you're a provider and work at a childcare center or a Head Start program, if you're a parent, want to talk to where your kid goes to an early learning program, or you work at one of the advocacy organizations in your state, having members visit a childcare program is incredibly powerful. There's nothing more these members love than coming in, getting a picture of them reading to a bunch of happy, smiling kids. And this is a really great time to build that relationship. They tour the facility, they talk to the staff, hear about the challenges that they are facing, hear about the challenges their parents and employers and employees alike in their district are facing. So you can really build these out to make them both a positive experience for the member and their staff, but also for the center and for the advocates building that relationship with the member and their staff. We've had some really great experience with this. For example, we had a congressman in Nebraska we were working with to try to make them a bigger child care champion. And after they did a couple of site visits of a Head Start program and then an early learning center in their district, they immediately became someone that was far more interested in signing on to child care bills and child care legislation after those visits and seeing the great work that those centers did in their district. So really great chance and time to build up that relationship with the member and their staff. If you want to go to the next one. The next tactic is a roundtable, and this can look a lot of different ways. This does not need to be some crazy fancy press event with cameras everywhere and childcare experts sitting around a table with the member. This can be everything from you and a handful of other parents or providers or advocates going in to meet with district staff, going in to meet with DC staff that's in town for the recess as well. Or if you're and getting that few extra minutes with the member, maybe doing a pop-in. This does not need to be some over-the-top fancy event, but it's really a great time to educate them on the childcare and early learning issues that your district is facing, that providers are facing, that parents and employers are facing. It's really great opportunity to not only just have that meeting and educate them, but to show the broad community support and awareness of these issues and the importance it is to the broader community. Having that ability to lift up multiple voices at once. There's always power in numbers. So showing up and being able to set up some of those meetings, again, even if it's just with staff, that goes a really long way in amplifying the issue for the office and for the member. And it's always important to remember in these meetings, always come in with a nice leave behind. Make sure to say thank you at the end, just as Brandon talked about in those meeting asks. It's a very similar setup, but having a good leave behind, whether it's one of those fact sheets or resources that we highlighted, and we will of course send out after the call that you can get from one of our partners, or maybe you have some already from your local organization, but having that great leave behind after one of these with the staff is always really important. I don't think we can mention enough, especially Daniel and how many times they've gone in to see somebody, one of the members, and seen one of their resources sitting at the top of their desk as they're trying to reference it as they're working on these issues. So really important to go in there with a few folks and have the power in numbers and continue to build that relationship as you educate the member. And again, very importantly, their staff. If you want to go to the next one. Now, on top of all that, we've talked a lot about the direct engagement. We've talked a lot about building those relationships with the office and the members. But it's really important also to amplify the work that is going on and the issues that whether it's early childhood education providers are facing, whether it's parents are facing, employers are facing. It's really important to lift up childcare issues with the community more broadly. Members' offices spend a lot of time looking at local papers. Even if you're in a rural area and you just have a weekly paper, I promise you the biggest subscriber is that member's office who's looking at it every week to see what local letters to the editor are being published. So using the August recess to submit that letter to the editor, maybe work with a couple other people in your state, in your district, or maybe one of the advocacy organizations in state that you work with, maybe to do a group op-ed or opinion piece in your local paper. But submitting those local letters to the editors are really important. They very much look at them. They spend a lot of time obsessing over them. And it's really important in those, especially if you mention directly the member and urge them to and make that ask through the letters to the editor, goes a long way in highlighting the issue with them. And especially if you're a childcare provider, don't be afraid to engage some of the local press on this topic. Childcare is always in the news one way or the other. A lot of times around the economic impact it's having, the struggles parents and employers are facing. Don't be afraid to engage them on the issues that you're facing and give them that chance to write again or talk more about it. We're really important with these kind of tactics to amplify and create that echo chamber within your community to make sure that the member is hearing more and more about it and that their staff is hearing more and more about it. We've had some really great luck over the years with these. For example, as we were working on the work to expand the child and dependent care tax credit, a lot of the local letters to the editors, op-eds went a long way in impacting some of the senators that we were hoping to sign on and co-sponsor key legislation that inevitably ended up passing. So it's really important that they hear about the importance because, as you can imagine, not a lot of members knew what the CDCTC was before we did a lot of LTEs and op-eds. So really important to amplify those issues and make sure that the community more broadly is hearing about them as well. So to help you with all this, if you want to go to the next slide, we have some toolkits from all the partners here, and we'll be sending these out as well. We have some of these great recess toolkits to help you submit that letter to the editor, make that phone call, find that office to ask for that meeting. All of these are great resources you can use. You can scan the QR code, and of course, we will send out the link. But these are all ways to help you as you're engaging during the August recess to make sure that that member of Congress and their staff is hearing about childcare and early learning. So with that, I think we are going to open it up for questions.
Thank you, everybody. That was so great. And yes, I'm going to open it up for questions. So one that I say, I miss getting the QR codes. Can you please reshare those at some point? Yes, we will be sending those around afterwards, and they'll also be up on our website. So don't worry, they will be in plenty of places. I know it's hard to scan all of them as you're going through. And then here is another question. What is the better strategy, making stronger relationships with district staffers or DC staffers? Whomever wants to take that first can jump in.
Happy to jump in first. So I'm going to not answer this question by saying both. It is always valuable to connect with your members of Congress staffers, and it's important to note that many of them are connecting with each other, are sharing information with each other, and are reporting back on what they're hearing to each other. Your DC staffers are going to be doing more direct work on the legislation, but they're going to be listening to what their district staffers are saying about the issues that are rising to prominence in their community. So there is no wrong way to approach a congressional office and connect with staffers, and any outreach is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and I'd add to what Daniel's saying, and note that sometimes it's more of a chain of relationships you build, and so it's really smart to start with whomever you can get some time to get to know and go from there. I recently saw a really nice evolution of this with one of the state partners that I was working with. There's a hearing coming up, and they are now at the stage where they write to both the DC staffer and the district staffer, the state staffer, on the same email when there's something happening very soon after years of work getting to know one, then the other. It now can be something that they coordinate and collaborate on. So I would say see who you can get some time to get to know this month in August and continue to keep them updated and find out who else you need to loop in when there are pressing issues, questions, and opportunities. You might get to know an even larger group of folks advising the member of Congress and be able to reach the person you need to just in time.
And then to kind of piggyback off of that answer, Anne, if someone else asked if you have a rep or a senator that did not sign on to the letters that we mentioned, is there still time to get them to sign on? So things like the Head Start support letter, the CCDBG letter, etc.
Yeah, so technically, those letters, those Dear Colleague letters, have closed for signature, which means that someone may not be able to sign on to the letter itself. But the good news is the letter is actually just an early step in the process of fighting for this funding in these appropriations bills. So while someone may not be able to sign on to the letter, they can very easily make that connection. A staffer can say to their boss, "Hey, Senator, why don't you make sure to flag for the heads of this committee that childcare is really important to you?" They can put out a statement on their own, share their thoughts on funding for childcare and early learning on their social media, and do lots of those kinds of things in the lead up to these funding bills being available. And if someone's on the right committee, they can even show up in committee and make the case for it. That's if they're on one of the appropriations committees. So just because they're not on the letter doesn't mean they won't support childcare and early learning. And they have a lot of ways to make their support for funding for childcare and early learning known, even though they can't sign on to the letters anymore.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anne. And then we have another question, and I think this can honestly go for both sides of the aisle, but this says, I live in a progressive state. Our representatives are very much aware of this and related issues. Does it matter that much when we know they're already convinced?
Intensity matters a lot. And I will say the reason that childcare has fared better in appropriation cycles than many other issues is not just because, members think it's a good idea. It's because the members who are in the best positions to do something about it feel very intensely about the issue. Senator Patty Murray is the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. Senator Susan Collins is the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. And I mentioned Senator Shelley Moore Capito. When you have members who are deeply engaged on these issues, who understand this not as just one of many priorities, but their top priority, their signature issue, they are more likely to go to the bat for that issue. And if there's horse trading, if there's compromising involved, that's the issue they're most likely to draw a line on and say, I will not support this bill without this increased funding, or this will not move without this increased funding. So regardless of whether they are a consistent yes vote, there's always more you can do to thank them for their support and make them feel like they need to be a champion for these issues.
Totally. And I think we had someone else ask if I'm a opposite party from my members, should I still reach out? And I think, Daniel, that applies as well, that same answer. And then would you recommend reaching out to local staffers requesting to help set up a site visit at a childcare, or first try to meet with the staffer and then at the meeting offer to help facilitate a site visit? Daniel, do you have any thoughts, or do both? Does the order matter, do you think?
No, I think to Anne's point, reach out where you can, build those relationships and connections where you can, and just keep moving up the chain or moving across the chain until you find the person that can help you. It really is going to depend. It's going to be different office by office, but I think making those initial touch points and reaching out initially is the most important thing you can do.
I'll offer one. This is more of like a observational or an anecdote. I do really enjoy when you get maybe a face-to-face moment with a member of Congress. Their staff is standing right there, and you're like, hey, I would love for you to come to my home-based childcare program or to my childcare center and meet my teachers and see my kids. And the member of Congress says, right there in the moment, I would love to. Let's make it happen. That's great. And so if you ever get that chance on a rope line at a town hall or in a meeting, go ahead and get the commitment and then follow up and make it happen. But I'm with Daniel. Get in, start to make the case, start to build a relationship, and offer these opportunities for education and learning for both the staff and the member of Congress.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Someone asked what sites they can access that provide specific numbers by congressional district for all of the childcare and early learning programs we're asking them to protect. I know that we have statewide district, we have district specific for Head Start, and I'm at First 5 Years Fund. We'll follow up with those. I'm not sure if, and I know that NAEYC and Child Care Aware also have lots of statewide numbers as well, and we will follow up with those after this. Someone else asked, I'm a family home childcare provider. Am I still included in all of this?
Yes, absolutely. The funding streams we mentioned are in support of a mixed delivery childcare system. So the funding that flows from all of the programs we mentioned have at least some component that's supporting childcare that's delivered in home-based or center-based settings. And these are the core funding streams for the subsidy in your state, which may have a name, a unique name. It's the vouchers that families are using to afford childcare. And of course, in many places, we also know that early Head Start partnerships and other ways in which early learning happens in communities may involve our home-based providers. So we hope that all of you, regardless of the type of childcare program you're a part of, that you know well, that's in your community, that's supporting people in your lives, that you will join us in the advocacy for this funding.
Absolutely. The only thing I'll add to that is if you're a home-based provider, if you're a center-based provider, whatever your provider type, whatever setting you're in, as you're bringing folks in to visit your programs, as you're connecting with folks, it's a great opportunity to lift up some of the unique issues that you face. And we've seen, for instance, in the last few years, and I know that FOF and others have been tracking all the legislation coming out, some really great bills that are really designed to speak to the specific needs of home-based providers. And some of the research that is building that legislation comes again from those relationships and from those connections that staff have made with providers, staff have made with the educators working in those programs. We're helping them understand the unique challenges and the unique opportunities that exist. So it is equally important and just critical to continue building those relationships, even beyond appropriations.
And I see a shout out from Ronald. I just want to remind folks that the NAFCC has some good advocacy tools on its website as well. And I think you'll see some strong alignment from all of what we're sharing about the importance of investing.
Joe, I'm actually going to throw this question to start over to you, and anyone else who wants to join in, please feel free. But are there any tips on leveraging relationships with local leaders on municipal boards, county council, boards of commissioners, etc., to reach out to state and federal legislators?
Absolutely. Building those coalitions within the community, whether it be local elected officials or business leaders, having that broader community, because everyone faces childcare challenges, goes a long way. So they're hearing from a diverse group of voices. So doing some of that same outreach we just talked about to your county commissioner or supervisor, whatever title it takes on, or your mayor or your city councilors. All those people deal directly with childcare issues as well, because their employers in their district need employees that have childcare. Or they themselves are dealing with maybe the local support that they are providing to childcare programs. So really important to engage those folks and bring them in as part of your coalition. I know a lot of states have a lot of really active and really great advocacy organizations within that have been working on building those coalitions. So partnering with them, working with them, a lot of times you can find them through a lot of great resources like the Alliance for Early Success or others to build out some of those connections. But feel free, just like we talked about with the member of Congress, building those relationships with your local elected officials and making them part of the conversation and engaging the federal delegation on these issues. A site visit goes a long way with everybody.
And Joe, what you were just saying reminds me, it almost brings us back to one of the questions we got earlier about these dynamics about, different members of Congress and their positions and, what you may feel like, they always agree or they don't. And do I still go talk to them? I think, this question and your answer is a good reminder about adding a different voice sometimes to the conversation as a way to potentially increase the intensity of support or bring a member of Congress on board to supporting, even if you feel like you've asked before, maybe bringing one of these new kinds of stakeholders to the table can help you get your point across. And one of the best things about Recess is folks are all there. So you don't have to get people on an airplane to DC.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they can just stop by a meeting and make that happen. So I think it's a great suggestion to try to think of an unlikely partner to bring along to help you make the case for childcare.
And then we had a great question, which is, if your lawmaker has expressed that they believe that, existing foundations or other private philanthropies or anyone else should close the gap in funding early learning, are there any additional points that can help communicate just why federal funding is so important and why our ask is so important?
I think we all have a ton of resources and talking points on this and many other questions. I think at the heart of the matter in early childhood education remains that the vast majority of parents simply cannot, without additional support, provide or fund the true cost of high quality childcare themselves. And we need these public funding streams to help make up the difference between what parents can afford to pay and what it truly costs to provide high quality childcare and build a supply of high quality childcare that includes well compensated, professionally recognized early childhood educators. The math simply doesn't work. And I know we've all put out so many resources and fact sheets and research briefs on the economics of childcare and why this doesn't work, including a great piece that just came out from Childcare, I know, Anne. So it really is as simple as there needs to be third-party support to make the math work for the vast majority of families. And unfortunately, the only real way that we can do that is through public dollars. Foundations play an important role. businesses play an important role in some communities, but absent public dollars, there's not a way to truly solve this for everybody. And even looking at the existing data on how many eligible families are served under our existing programs, which are so critical, we know that we're still falling far short of the need, even to serve just the families that our programs are currently designed to serve, let alone all families that really need support accessing high quality childcare.
I'll also flag one other thing folks may want to talk a little bit about in this vein is, federal funding, public investment, but specifically at the federal level, does help us ensure that we're not reliant, family is not reliant on the, its zip code and the prevalence or presence of these outside philanthropy or employers as funding streams. Our public investment reflects that we all benefit from childcare and the availability of childcare, and it helps us ensure that we all families can benefit without regard for zip code. There are, of course, disparities in our current system that additional investment can help us tackle, and I think that's a good conversation to have with some of your members of Congress, depending on their interest.
And then we have time for 2 more questions. So I've seen a lot of questions about where funding for Head Start stands, and then also, why it's important for us to keep talking about I know we've talked about all the programs, but Head Start, etc.
Yeah, Jane, one of the things I forgot to mention in my remarks was just that we did, roll us back to earlier in the spring where we saw Congress receive from the president budget proposals from the administration. And while those are just recommendations, Congress gets to write their own funding bills. Those budget proposals from the administration definitely, I think, offered a reversal from some early indications we had gotten that there might be proposed reductions in funding for programs like Head Start. The administration ended up proposing level funding for CCDBG and for Head Start, though some cuts and eliminations elsewhere. And as it stands right now, in terms of the appropriated funding or the funding that Congress has made available, we've not seen cuts and eliminations to programs, and we'd like to keep Congress on track with that as the goal, to protect these programs, to again fund them at FY26, to not make cuts or eliminations. And I did mention earlier that we know that there may be activities going on with the administration, and exactly how folks are accessing funding may be varying across the country. It's a great thing to share the experience you might be having as a program with that, but also then making it clear that Congress should continue to make those investments and not eliminate or cut these programs.
And it really is Congress that has the power to make these decisions constitutionally. I mean, I think the only thing I'll add to that is we do recognize that this is not going to be the easiest year for the federal funding environment. And the reason we're talking about protect and invest is because this year, protect might actually be how we define a win in the current context, especially after seeing some of the recent fights over rescissions. But again, Congress has consistently showed up in a bipartisan way around these critical programs, and it's important to remind them why it is so important to keep doing that.
And then just to end on for all of you, how can we turn, and this is a bigger question, so feel free to answer it however you see fit, but how can we turn this one-time meeting or like an event during recess into a longer term relationship with your member of Congress or with your representative?
Well, one of the things that I think is really helpful is that while August recess is one of our longer work periods where your member of Congress comes back to the district or the state, you're going to get more opportunities to see them over the course of the fall throughout the year. And one of the things that the follow-up approach that Brandon suggested offers you the opportunity to do is to meet again, or take that next step to the site visit or the other tactic that you'd like to bring into play. So be thinking about how, if you start with something in August, how you can then suggest something when folks are back in the fall during recess, again over the holidays and into next year. And best case scenario, you start to write that weekly or biweekly email to the staffer with a quick childcare update, and they come to use your talking points in their conversations with their boss. Love to see it when that happens. Know it sometimes takes time, but hopefully this can be your foot in the door.
Yeah, I'll echo that with Anne and say those local district reps are often very much looking for time to fill around issues that their boss cares about or what's going on in their community. A lot of times they will have office hours themselves. Sometimes it's just them posting up in a coffee shop or, since I'm from Iowa, a local Casey's, and just hanging out there to meet with constituents. So showing up to some of those and just being present and kind of their day to day can go a long way, because they will end up spending, especially when the member is back, a lot of time with that member. So you kind of finding your way to be part of their day to day so that they're hearing about it, whether it is the emails or showing up when they're having meetings, can be really impactful.
And I will just say one of the best things to come out of the pandemic, and this is the only time I'm ever going to say anything good came out of the pandemic, is it has made congressional staff so much more accessible. So it is so much easier to continue to follow up, set up those virtual meetings. Staff love to do that. Members love to spend time communities in a lot of different ways, but you can absolutely continue to follow up and just build that scaffolding, and then come back to events like NACCE's Public Policy Forum or Child Care Aware Symposium. Show off your knowledge, if I can make a shameless plug.
Yep, I echo what everybody said. Just don't be a stranger. Follow up, meet again. And to also echo what Daniel said earlier, make that, intensity by meeting consistently. Even if it's not on the radar, put it on the radar. Or if it is on the radar, make that radar blink a little bit louder. Because as Daniel also said earlier, the environment is pretty rough right now, and it's going to take everything we can do, for at least the next 2 years, but possibly longer.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being so engaged and for joining. We are just so thankful to have such a great number of advocates like you. Look out for our follow-up email. It'll have all the links in one easy place. You won't just have to try to scan a QR code really quickly on your phone if you did not get the chance to do that. And please reach out to us. I think you all have my email, and we'll send more information in our follow-up. And we're just excited to get active with you. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Oh.